On day 41, SNAP benefits still being held for millions of Americans. The Senate is working to finalize this legislative package, apparently, that would end the government shutdown. It did follow that key vote that happened Sunday night. It saw 8 Democrats cross the aisle to embrace the deal. And you heard, I'm sure, Senator Bernie Sanders say last night that this was not a good thing for Democrats to do. But even Senate Majority Leader John Thune telling reporters that they hope in the near future they can get something done today to finalize this deal. They have several procedural hurdles to finalize the legislation, and that really any senator could delay this process. So it's in a very infancy stage here, and we'll see. So the bill will need the final approval from the House once it clears the Senate, and then the signature of the president before the shutdown ends. So it could still be a matter of days or weeks for this to be ended. I know there's still optimism. So we're going to bring in Mitch Kokai, member, director of communications for the John Locke Foundation. Great to have you again, Mr. Koch. I appreciate your time. I know we talked at length on election night. Interesting that we're now nearly a week out from that. Still, the government shutdown is impacting millions of Americans, federal workers as well. You saw the lines, I'm sure, over the weekend at different airports. This is really causing chaos, but it does look like for the senators that are involved in this right now, they want to get something done. Now, this is just a short-term bill, right? This is not something that we will see that will be a long-term spending bill. I mean, we're kicking the can down the road, right?
It is a short-term plan. There are a few pieces of the year-long spending plan that would be finalized, but they're only a very minuscule portion of the overall deal. Generally, Congress is supposed to deal with about 12 different funding bills each year. They almost never deal with 12 separate bills. They kind of roll them together, and usually rather than passing one comprehensive bill that'll cover a whole year, they'll just do a continuing resolution that lasts for a while. And that's what we would have here as well. If this deal gets finalized, as it's spelled out right now, it would fund all of the government through January 30th, so basically the next 2.5 months, and then we'd have to deal with some of this mess again. But it does deal with some full 4-year spending for Veterans Affairs, for some of the agriculture expenses that the federal government is dealing with, and probably not a shock at all, the legislative branch. So Congress would fund its own bills for a year as part of this deal. But it'll be interesting to see what happens. You mentioned in your lead-in that this is, even though we have a deal, it's not finalized. All that has happened at this point, and this is the most significant thing that had to happen, but it's all that has happened at this point, is that 8 Democratic senators or Democratic aligned senators, independents who vote with the Democratic caucus, decided to cross the aisle, vote with Republicans to get to that 60 vote threshold you would need to end a filibuster. So that has happened. That's what happened Sunday night. But still, what remains to be done is for the Senate to actually pass the package. You reference what the Majority Leader John Thune talked about, the fact that any member of the Senate could delay that happening. They're no longer filibustering the deal, but they could, any individual one could delay the actual vote on the package itself. And so if that doesn't come to pass, if there's no delay and the Senate can actually get this bill through its chamber sometime during the course of the rest of this day, or perhaps if not today, early on Wednesday, the House has pledged, the House leadership has pledged to take this up as soon as Wednesday. So if the Senate could get this done quickly, the House has pledged to get its vote done quickly, and they don't have to worry about some of the same hurdles and obstacles. They have no filibuster and can get things done more quickly if necessary. And then one assumes that if this bill gets done, it goes to President Trump's desk, then he would likely sign it pretty soon, although there has been at least some concern raised by Democrats who don't like the deal that perhaps President Trump would not go along with the piece of this deal that says that he can't have that mass layoff of workers that he's layoffs of workers that he's been interested in, because the deal says, in addition to covering the spending of the government through January 30th, it says no mass layoff of workers through that time frame, back pay for all of the workers who've been laid off, and then also The issue that Democrats were using to not come to the table and come to a deal, this idea of the extending the Obamacare tax credits, that there would be a standalone vote on that issue going forward. Now, there's no guarantee it would pass, and in fact, Republicans would likely vote against it, but at least everyone would be on record about where they stand on these tax credits. And so that was part of the deal moving forward. So if everything comes to pass as the people making the deal hope, we could have something that would get to President Trump's desk as early as Wednesday. And if President Trump goes along with it, that means the shutdown could end Wednesday. And then if that's true, then you would deal with the sort of unraveling of what came to pass because of the shutdown, which means that some of the things that have been delayed or shut down or not taking place during the course of this past month plus would finally come back into play. And maybe by the end of the week, we would start seeing things getting back to normal with the federal government. And then there'd be the countdown till the end of January when all of this crops back up again.
Well, and I guess that's what worries me is we're gonna go through this exact cycle once again, and I'm sure Americans across America probably thinking the same thing. Mr. Kokai, you pointed something out about the health subsidies, and in fact, it seems like premiums are already going to rise. I mean, I'm already seeing, and I read an article earlier today that people are seeing the prices rise on their premiums already because these health subsidies have not been extended. I know that they are looking to do so. The Democrats are. But in terms of that, do you think, and we'll go back to the government shutdown, do you think that that's going to cause some sticker shock to Americans who start to realize that their premiums are going to go up as long as they are on the Affordable Care Act, right? If you're getting through, your private health insurance through your employer, that is much different. This is specifically for folks who are going through the Affordable Care Act marketplace and getting their insurance there. I mean, my parents, we just had a discussion, their premiums are rising at least double. And I've seen sometimes, in some cases, they are quadrupling or even tripling. So is that going to be something that you think people are going to start to pay attention to that could impact, I guess, the midterm elections, right?
Potentially could affect the midterm elections. I think one of the things that we saw that was a factor in the 2025 elections was concerns about affordability, and healthcare is part of that. But other things are part of that too. And I think that's something that both parties are really going to be harping on as we get into the midterm elections. If affordability continues to be a major factor and concern for people, that could be good news for Democrats and likely would be bad news for Republicans because Republicans are the ones in charge. They have the White House and they have both chambers of Congress, although, as we've seen with the shutdown, the Senate can't do much unless it has, the Senate Republicans can't do much unless they have at least some Democratic support. But still, you have to know civics to know that. If you know just the basics, that there's Trump in the White House and Republicans in charge of Congress, then Republicans are going to get the blame if you think that affordability is something that government has a role in dealing with. You mentioned healthcare premiums. That's something that everyone is dealing with. Certainly the people who are on the Affordable Care Act plans, they're going to be dealing with it, but everyone else is dealing with it too. And I think if you see affordability, whether it's healthcare or the larger issue of anything else that's in your basket of goods that you spend money on, if all of that looks to be a lot more expensive when people are heading to the polls in fall of 2026 than it is right now, or even where it was in the fall of 2024, that's good news for Democrats electorally and bad news for Republicans.
Going back to the funding bill's passage, it looks like Senate Republicans want to speed up this process. Senator Mike Rounds from South Dakota saying today that there are some procedural hurdles, which you alluded to. One of the things is the Republicans are looking to get unanimous consent from senators to move this bill forward. I mean, Veterans Day is tomorrow. A lot of these individuals who they represent, their constituents, they of course have events planned in their state tomorrow. So I'm expecting that a lot of them want to get out of town, get back to their state to some of these events. I think it's interesting though, because Mark Wayne Mullen from Oklahoma saying that they're trying to consider to put up amendments warning that if they do, this process could drag into next week. What type of amendments would that? I mean, I know that we're just shooting in the dark at this point, but I mean, could that be the discussion about healthcare subsidies? And I did see SNAP being discussed, right? That looks to be funded until September of next year. But as you alluded to earlier in the interview, once we get to a certain point, all of the things are going to have to come back up in the budget, to have to be discussed and be funded once again, right?
Well, if they're dealing with any amendments, that would delay things, of course. What has happened is that the Republicans, working with some Democrats that they knew they might be able to get to help push this deal over the finish line, came up with an agreement. And I'm sure the agreement says, if anything changes, then we have to go back and see if we still have an agreement. So the idea is there's an agreement, no amendments, move the agreement forward, vote on it, send it to the House, have the House vote on it in the exact same form, and then send it to President Trump. We see that all the time at the state legislative level as well. There will be a deal between the House and the Senate. Someone will want to make an amendment, but the people who are pushing the deal say, no, if you have an amendment, that messes up the deal and we'll have to go back to square one. So if people are considering amendments at this point, and if that's allowed to go forward, that probably puts us back instead of moving us forward to getting a resolution. The deal was the deal that was crafted that Republicans could accept, but also these 8 either Democrats or independents who caucus with Democrats could also accept. The unanimous consent piece is a procedural hurdle that without the unanimous consent, it takes longer to get a vote on an item. If even the people who oppose this deal agree that at least, we'll go ahead and vote on the deal, we're going to vote against it, but let's get this deal on the table so that we could get the shutdown done. That's what you would need, and that's what the unanimous consent calls for, that even if you're going to vote against the deal, at least allow it to be put on the table for a vote. If you start seeing discussion of amendments or changing the deal, then that probably throws the whole thing back into chaos, and we would continue on past day 41 into 42 and 43 and beyond.
Well, and it seems very perilous, the situation where we're at, because I just found this. It seems like Senator Rand Paul, who's been interesting voting along party lines, right? Specifically based on how conservative these spending bills might be. He wanted to stick, apparently, into this new funding plan to seek a vote on an amendment that would strip the larger funding package of language restricting the use of hemp products. So it's these small, minute things that some of these senators want to add to this larger bill that a lot of folks ask, like, why? Why are they wanting? And I think I understand, right? There's a reason they understand why they want to fine tune and put some of these bills in into the fine tuning the language into this larger bill. But I just want to ask you quickly, Mr. Kokai, why would these senators use this opportunity when we are in a government shutdown? Folks aren't getting a paycheck to put in these little clauses that really could, as we are talking about, not end the government shutdown.
Well, this is when they have power to do these things. When the government is operating as normal, people aren't paying attention, but people right now are calling for the government to get this shutdown done, want to have some sort of resolution. I think during the opening days, a lot of folks outside of federal government weren't feeling it, but now that you are seeing that it's going beyond people who get a government paycheck to people who are flying, anyone who's flying somewhere and seeing the impacts, and others who don't necessarily rely directly on the government, but do have sort of a second or third impact of what the government does once they're starting to feel it. And now as we're getting closer to the holidays, I think there is a much stronger focus on getting a deal done. And if you know that you're one of the 60 senators whose vote is necessary to get this done, and there's something that you really want the Senate to do that they probably won't otherwise do, you throw it out there. Now, whether Rand Paul would withhold his vote over this issue remains to be seen, but I think this is the time for some senators when they say, The only time I'm going to get this done is when they need my vote to open the government back up.
Yeah.
How much they'll stick with that remains to be seen. My guess is that one of the things Rand Paul might be angling for is, okay, I'll vote in the shutdown, but you better give me a vote at some point in the not too distant future on this issue that I care about. And that may be what's happening with these other proposed amendments as well. People saying, all right, I'll give you my vote for now, but you better take up this issue. And if you don't, I will remember it the next time we deal with this, which, as we've talked about, is going to come up at the end of January.
That's right. It won't be long, as I said, kicking the can down the road. Anything else that you wanted to elaborate on? I asked you some pretty specific questions based on some things that just kind of matriculated into the news. And in fact, Democratic Representative Ro Khanna of California putting the blame on Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer just seconds ago. So it's interesting. You see this infighting with Democrats now in the House. So I guess we'll just see where it goes. But I'll leave the floor up to you, Mr. Kokai. Anything else that you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, a couple of interesting things. I think, first of all, if this does get resolved here in the next few days, probably by the time people head to the polls in November of 2026, it'll be long gone, distant memory, and won't really have as much of an impact as the things that are top of mind in October and November of 2026. But I do think that after a big election win, on the election day in November, when Democrats were looking at the results and for the most part saying, hey, we really like what happens, now we see sort of a chink in the armor for them when some Democrats break from the party line to go along with this deal. And as you just mentioned, Chuck Schumer is catching a lot of heat from some of the, especially the progressive Democrats, saying, why weren't you able to hold everyone together to get the vote and to get the support for the health care subsidies that we wanted? I'm not sure that that's going to have a major impact when we get to 2026 as well, but certainly it'll have a short-term impact on what happens with leadership in the U.S. House and Senate in the coming months.
Absolutely, and I hope they get it figured out because, as you know, with all the flight issues that we just had over the last week, man, the holidays, it could really be chaotic for a lot of folks. So hoping things get figured out, especially for those individuals who are going without a paycheck. I just cannot imagine. So thank you, Mr. Kokai, for spending some time with us on this Monday. Appreciate you, and thanks for your time.
Well, thank you for having me again.
No problem. It's always a pleasure. All right, folks.